I can remember the first time I ever sat in a select committee. I'd only just been elected in 2005, and it was for a committee that now no longer exists. It was the Trade and Industry Select Committee. And it was perplexing, bemusing, exciting, exhilarating all at the same time. And the chairman seemed so authoritative and knowledgeable about the subject area that it was really quite daunting as well. What I've learned over the years is, far from being daunting, it is the most exciting opportunity to learn about policies in more detail.
My first experience of a select committee was appearing as a witness when I was president of the National Union of Students, and I remember being incredibly nervous appearing before the committee. And later I was an education minister and had to appear to give evidence, and I always found that the most challenging and daunting part of the job of being a minister was that select committee accountability. Now that I'm on the other side chairing a committee, part of that committee, I do realise that we are perhaps not as scary as people think that we're going to be. And I'm always at pains to encourage particularly expert witnesses to be relaxed, because we're there to hear from them. We're not there to catch them out.
I am the only Liberal Democrat on our committee, and I have to win the trust of colleagues in the Labour Party, in the Conservative Party, and a Scottish nationalist. And that's something I've really enjoyed doing, and I think we've produced a really coherent and strong committee, but it was very scary to start with.
It was terrifying. I mean, I didn't expect ever to be a select committee chair, so I hadn't really sort of properly prepared for it. And it was just an overwhelming thought that I was actually doing this for the first time. So I really enjoyed it. It's 4 years now that I've been in the chair, and I've really enjoyed the experience of doing this.
Being the chair of a select committee, you can look at a wide range of different policy areas. Really anything, any area that you feel needs scrutiny, it needs interrogation. And it's a great opportunity to be able to really interrogate whether or not the government's delivering on its policies.
So I wanted to have a bit more time to ask the questions that really shape our debates. Because when you're in the House of Commons, when you're actually in the chamber, you get a few minutes, really, either literally a couple of minutes because you're in questions, or only about 5 or 10 minutes if you're in serious debate. So if you want to really explore a subject, the only way to do it is on a select committee.
When you chair a select committee, you're in a very privileged position, but the only point of doing it is if you're actually going to make a difference for citizens and taxpayers. So when we get government to make a change because we've pointed something out, that is very satisfying. It takes some time for government to shift its position, but when we achieve that, that is really good. And one of the things that's very nice is when constituents and citizens write in and tell us that something has changed as a result.
Well, I think what the select committees provide is a safe space where we could dispense with the traditional party politics and try to agree things consensually, and ensure that we could make some progress in a whole range of issues without being encumbered by our own political ideologies. So I think they're a really, really useful part of our parliamentary process, and I think that more than anything gives the select committees their own place in this House.
People often talk about the usual suspects, and one thing I would say is sometimes the usual suspects are usual for a reason. They know their brief, they know what they're talking about. But it's so vital that we hear other voices, younger voices, voices from black and minority ethnic communities, particularly working in international development. I'm anxious that we hear from voices outside of this country, and that we work out ways of engaging with witnesses and other evidence from people in Africa, in Asia, in other parts of the world, not just people who are based here in our own country.
Well, the Women and Equality Select Committee is one of the newest committees in Parliament, and I'm proud that it's been established in the first place in the last few years. But I have to say, when it comes to our reports, it was the Sexual Harassment in Schools report, which I'm most proud of. Why? Because it actually led to sex and relationship education being made mandatory for all school-age children, something which governments of many different persuasions had failed to do for almost 2 decades. And I believe our report really helped to break that impasse.
I'm really proud of the work that the Science and Technology Committee has done on research integrity and on clinical trials transparency, 2 absolutely vital issues in the research community. And I think we've had an impact through the reports that we have produced, and I think it will result in change which will enhance this country's reputation for research integrity and for transparency in years to come.
Since I became the chair of the Scottish Affairs Committee, I've been determined to take the committee as much as possible to Scotland, and we've been all over Scotland now, making them available, making sure that people can see us in action. And I think that more than anything else was this reconnection with the people of Scotland to make the committee much more available and more useful to the people who decide our agenda for us. So I think shaping our agenda based on what people tell us what they want, I think is the greatest thing that I've achieved as the chair of the Select Committee.
Evidence sessions can be really tough. Sometimes the evidence can be harrowing. Listening to the evidence, for example, that we heard recently of a Uyghur Muslim woman from Xinjiang and hearing the abuse that her family have been going through, or North Korean dissident and hearing the brutality conducted against her family. But the real problem with evidence sessions is they're so short. You know, you've got at best 2 or 3 hours. Now that sounds like a long time, but when you've got 2 panels, maybe 3 witnesses on each panel, you're talking very few minutes per panelist to respond to questions that often you could talk about really for hours.
Being in the chair in general, it's an amazing position because you see, one, the witnesses, the body language that they have, and that is something quite revealing, but also the people behind them, and I'm giving away a secret of the committee room here. It's the people behind, when they're nodding vigorously, you know that the person in front has done what they've been told to do. And when they shake their head, you think, aha, we've got somewhere. They've said something they were not told to do.
I guess the thing that frustrates me most in an evidence session is those witnesses who really won't answer in a straight way the question that you put to them. I always want to ensure that we're courteous, polite to witnesses that appear before us, but I do expect in return straight answers to clear questions.
The big change I'd make to select committees is the resources that we have available to us. At a time where scrutiny is more important than ever, we're under continual 24/7 scrutiny from media organisations, from interest groups, from members of the public, from our constituents. We need more resources to be able to do more reports and more detailed reports, and particularly being able to get our own research. We are wholly reliant, for the most part, on the research that's done by outside organisations. And if there's a gap in research, it's very difficult to fill it.
What I'd like to see in the future is much more interactive support for people who are watching who may not be in the room itself. And even in the room itself, if we refer, for example, to a graph or a statistic, there's no way easily for that to flash up on a screen, or for it, certainly if you're watching it online or on the TV, none of that information is there. And the danger is then that we're having a conversation of detail between a group of MPs who know about the subject and the witnesses who know about the subject, and we can dive in at too high a level. So I would like to see background information much more easily available to people online.
For the future, select committees need to engage a lot more with technology. We look at opportunities, for example, to hear from voices in other countries. It's hard to set up, for example, the kind of video conferencing that might enable a witness in Nairobi to give evidence to our committee. So if we can really get the technology right, we can engage more with audiences both here in this country, but also for committees like mine, audiences internationally as well.
One of the things I would do is I would make them much more open. So actually, although there are 11 members of the committee, I would allow, under the permission of the chair, others to be invited if they had a particular expertise. So if there's somebody in Parliament who isn't a member of the Select Committee, either because their work in other areas doesn't allow them to, or because they don't have time, whatever it is, that you could invite them on as a guest member to ask a particular series of questions.
If I could swap committees for the day.
Wow, that's okay, let me think. I have to think about that one for a minute.
Oh, well, that's quite easy for me, believe it or not.
Wow, I mean, if I could swap for a day, I'd have a go on all of them, to be honest.
It would be culture, media and sport was my background as a musician and artist. There was always, I think there was a slight possibility I might have got that one about 4 years ago, but for a number of reasons it didn't quite happen.
Oh, if I could swap committee for a day, now that is a difficult question.
It would be the Health and Social Care Select Committee. I was a minister in the Department for Health, as it was called in that time. It's an area that I'm absolutely fascinated by, particularly mental health. and I'd love to spend a little bit of time on that committee.
There's two that stand out. One is the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee, because obviously with no government in Northern Ireland at the moment, that's a particularly interesting time. And I think the other one actually is DWP, because the pensions issue in this country is so critical, and work issues. I think there's a lot of things there that I'd like to get stuck into.
I find it very difficult to go on to another committee at the moment, because everything we're doing on the Women and Equality Select Committee is fascinating and exciting and hugely important. But we find we have a lot of overlap in the things we do with the Home Affairs Committee. And if I wasn't on the Women and Equalities Committee, I probably want to be on the Home Affairs Committee.
I love chairing the International Development Committee. It's a great privilege, but if I could have the opportunity to swap, I guess I'd swap with my good friend Meg Hillier and chair the Public Accounts Committee, because she gets to hold the whole of government to account.
In a few minutes' time, I'm going to be a guest on the Science and Tech Committee with Norman Lamb, Sir Norman Lamb. And the reason I'm going is because they're doing some really impressive work on Huawei and on the technology behind quite a lot of the political choices that are facing us through the 5G revolution. But I'd also love to be on the DCMS committee, because the work that Damien Collins is doing there is fantastic. The way he is challenging the internet industry to be responsive. But if you look at the work that Nicky Morgan's doing on Treasury, you can see that the amazing range of work that she's been doing, not just on the UK's tax policy, but on banks and the stability of our financial and global financial system, is fantastic. But perhaps, I suppose, the premier committee in some ways is Meg Hillier on public accounts, where you have the complete span of all government spending. So I think there's any number of areas that I would love to do, and that's a bit political as an answer, because I haven't chosen anything. But I think it just tells you that the truth is that all committees can do fascinating work if the committee members, if the chair wishes to lead them into those areas. Because the truth is, any aspect of British policy, whether it's foreign policy, whether it's financial policy, whether it's domestic policy, is about changing the lives and supporting the communities that make up these wonderful islands. So I think any of that can be really fascinating.